Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be watching from. Welcome to episode 83 with today's guests, all the way from um, Queensland, Australia,
That's correct.
Mr.
Yeah.
Jackie Barnes. Thank you so much for joining us today. Going to
Thanks
give
for
you
having me, mate.
a quick little introduction. Not only is Jackie a fabulous drummer, he's a keyboard player, he's a composer, as well as a vocalist. And man, this is one of the busiest drummers that I have seen. We've been Facebook friends and social media acquaintances for maybe the last close to year or so. And Jackie first came on my radar, being a fellow Gretsch artist. I always love seeing who is new to the roster. And when I saw Jackie's name, I'm like, okay, this is familiar. And I had to look at the Gretsch page and went, wow, wow, look. And I can't believe how much you travel. I'm 90 minutes north of Toronto in a place called Orillia, Ontario. And you're going
Yep.
to be playing here in just about 3 weeks or so, about
A
an
couple of
hour
weeks, yeah.
away. And of course, I'm going to be out playing somewhere else. But not only are you the busiest guy, man, you are a fabulous drummer. And I heard a little clip of you singing, and also as a fun thing, singing Dancing Queen.
Oh
Uh,
man, you saw that video.
I happened to just come across it, but man, you have a great voice, and man, a really wonderful career. And
Thank
you're
you.
not even 40 years old yet. So currently, we see Jackie playing with Lockie Doley. Is it the
That's correct.
Lockie Doley group, or is it him?
It's kind of a bit of both, you know. He does release stuff under Lockie Doley, but when we go out as a band, it's usually the Lockie Doley group. But you know, they're much the same, you know.
Sure.
Um, yeah, it's a fantastic gig. Lockie's great to work with, and we're just playing so many shows all the time.
I see that. A couple of other artists that you are known to play with: Rose Tattoo, your father, Jimmy Barnes,
Yep.
Diesel, not the Australian band, or the
Yeah,
Netherlands.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, Australian band
Oh,
Diesel. So actually,
man,
Diesel or Mark Lazotte is his real name. He's my uncle. So he's married to my mum's sister. So it's a you know
this is awesome.
big
And,
family band back here in
wow.
Australia.
Other credits include Keith Urban, Jonathan Cain, Neil Sean, Steve Morse, Joe Bonamassa, the Dead Daisies, the Wiggles, Glenn Hughes, Teddy Tethers. Man, I'm telling you, I haven't seen a career this broad and large in a long time. So let's go back. Actually, so let's chat about and see what it is that you are doing these days. Who are you playing with, and where are you playing? Let's talk about what's happening now.
So at the moment, I mean, I've just come off the tour with Lockie Doley around the States. So we just did about 4 or 5 weeks across mostly the eastern states. So we kind of made our way from Pennsylvania down to Florida, back up through Louisiana, and kind of, you know, we kind of snaked around a bit, and that was great. And I've got a couple more trips to the States with Lockie coming up. So we've got a big tour that's just announced later in the year with Here Come the Mummies, who are a great band. So we're going to be supporting them for a couple of months. So I think there's about 35, 40 shows or something like that with them later in the year. We've got some dates that have been announced for the summer in July around the States, and I believe there's some more being announced soon. So that's shaping up nicely. I'm about to head out actually tomorrow. I'm about to head out to start rehearsing with a great English artist called Roachford. So I'll be doing his Australia, New Zealand tour for the next kind of 3 weeks. And then I do that random one-off date in Orangeville, Ontario.
Right, right.
And then I fly back to Australia the day after that and start rehearsals for Dad's new album tour, which runs all of June. So it's nonstop. It's great.
Wow. When do you sleep?
I don't.
No, and you know what? There's time for that later. Man.
When you tour as much as I do, and all those guys out there that are road dogs will kind of understand that you just kind of get the rest when you can, and you know, it's not a normal sleep pattern by any means, but I definitely get enough rest for sure.
Yeah. And it's temporary. At some point, you won't be doing this as much, and so you might as well live your life now and do what you love to do. So that is awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, for those who don't know who Lucky Dolly is, what kind of music is this? I had to listen to this and went, man, this is exciting.
Yeah.
What would you say it is?
Well, look, we get lumped into kind of the blues genre. We tend to play a lot of blues festivals and, get lumped in with blues artists, but I wouldn't really call it straight up blues. There's lots of different elements in there. There's elements of rock, there's elements of jazz, blues, soul, funk. It's basically, all of our influences from growing up. And then obviously a lot of people on this last tour saying, oh, you guys should do some of the jam band circuit, because we do tend to kind of go on tangents, right. And yes, there's a lot of improvisation involved. And in actual fact, we just got announced on the Jam Cruise for next year. So
that is cool. And where is that?
That's out of Miami. It goes to I think Grand Turk and the Bahamas. So it's going to be great.
And what other groups are on that bill? Do you know?
Well, Stanton Moore's on there with Galactic.
Oh, cool.
He's also there with a band with George Porter and Leon Osentelli from the Meters, plus Ivan Neville. So they're the ones I'm super excited to see. I mean, I've been a huge fan of Stanton's for many years. Never met. We've chatted a couple of times online, and obviously being a fellow Gretsch artist, that's extra exciting. And also as a lifelong Meters fan, to see George and Leo play. And, I've seen Ivan with the Neville brothers over the years, and Dumpster Funk are on there as well, I think.
What a great
Lettuce are on there, so I'm excited to see Lettuce.
Oh, man, I can imagine. That would be an awful lot of fun playing that. So I can totally see Lockie being a part of that kind of scene, because, as you said, there's some improvisation.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, because you definitely, sometimes people have to pigeonhole an artist saying, this is primary. Now they're called blues. Sometimes I've heard it funk blues, which might be a little bit closer with that, adding that funky element.
Absolutely. It's definitely, I would say it's definitely more towards the funk realm than the blues realm. But, we cross a lot of different borders, and, we're an international band anyway. So
that is so great that you can just, fly up here for one show.
For a one-off, yeah. It's one of those things that we've kind of, when it first started out, and look, it is still, in certain cases, Lockie will fly out and pick up musicians. He's definitely done that in Canada before. But, we've worked our way up to levels where, for the most part, at least two of the three could travel, maybe all three of us.
Yeah.
So we just we take it each tour or gig at a time and just see what works logistically. Because obviously I'm jumping between a bunch of different projects as well at the same time. And so, if that date wasn't lined up perfectly to fly in and fly out, then I probably would have gotten a sub for it, because, being a one-off, it's not as bad as missing a whole run. And, but obviously it's one of those things that when the A-team's on that gig, you definitely notice.
Yeah, for sure. That is awesome. Oh, man. Let's go back in time to the very beginning for you. So it says on your site that you were performing when you were 4 years old.
Yeah. So look, my earliest memories in life are on tour with Dad. When I was born, he was on tour around the States with ZZ Top. And I flew out with my mum at 2 weeks old and joined him on the road, and spent the first few months of my life sleeping in a road case. So, I've definitely been on the road from birth. And, my earliest memories are sitting on Tony Brock's lap. So Tony was Dad's drummer in the late 80s, and played on a few of his records. And, so he was the guy that kind of I looked up to in the early years. And still do, Tony, I still keep in touch with him. He's in Atlanta now and still doing stuff with a version of the Babies. And what a phenomenal drummer. So I grew up sitting on his lap, hitting the drums, and they're my earliest memories. And then when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my siblings and I, my three sisters and I we basically formed a kids group, that my dad and one of his producers put together, and we did like kind of shows around Australia, New Zealand, and we released 3 records. They all went number 1. We got nominated for an ARIA award when I was 5, and so I've been performing since I was a little kid, and so it's just one of those lifelong adventures that we grew up surrounded by it. We grew up surrounded by wonderful musicians and just in the industry. So it was kind of my sisters and I have all done other things and like branched out and tried other things, but we've always fallen back to music. It's always been the dominant force in our lives.
Your story is a little bit unusual nowadays, where maybe 50 years ago it was more common for the kids to be, involved with in music with the parents, because the parents were on the road, like Grateful Dead, Bill Kreutzmann's son, and others. But for most people that I know, including myself, I didn't start playing drums till later, but we didn't really have anybody in the family that was really successful at it, so we kind of had to make our own way, which is totally great too. But man, that's great that you didn't rely on your father's name. Like you have some skills.
There's always a fine line between nepotism and earning it, and kind of it was one of those things that early on in my career, when I first joined Dad's band, because I've been his drummer now over 20 years, so I was quite young when I joined the band, but and I can remember at the time there were people like on forums and stuff that were commenting, he's only got that gig because of his dad, blah blah blah. But the reality is that I auditioned for that band 3 times and got
really. What was the audition process like? What did you do?
In that period of time, my dad included, it was a tumultuous time with addiction in not only our family, but in the just around music in the scene in general. And we had various members come in and out of the band. Whenever there was an opportunity to try and take the drum chair, I would put my hand up. And the first time I was playing in the studio at home, and my dad just came in and said, "No, you're not ready.
Wow,
you need to go out and get some other gigs and work harder, and get some work ethic, and really kind of earn it." So I went out and I ended up touring with some bands and doing some kind of like regional runs around Australia, and then came back about a year later or so. We had another audition, and still wasn't ready. Then about a year after that, I ended up joining the band as the keyboard player. So the keyboard player left for a period of time, and I was just at home practicing, playing parts, and I was just kind of like, I just told my dad, "Look, I've learned all the parts in case you need someone to fill in temporarily until you find," because I wouldn't call myself like one of those keyboard players. It's a crazy improviser, like Lockie, for instance.
Right.
I was brought up classically trained on piano, so I definitely thought more compositionally than anything else. So I was a composer and played the parts, but I didn't necessarily have that kind of improvisation. And then, so I did a couple of tours as the keyboard player, mostly just playing the parts. I wasn't doing like big solos and stuff like that, but all the parts were there. And then the drummer left, and my dad finally said, "You're ready, if you want to have a go."
Wow.
And look, like with any gig over the years, if I get given an opportunity, I want to make sure that they're going to miss me when I'm gone. That's always been my mentality towards preparing for a show, is that I want to be, I want to make an impression on them so that when I'm not there, they'll miss me.
That's a great attitude. You really work hard. And I remember reading an interview with Steve White when he had joined the Style Council in the 80s, and he said, "I'm going to practice so much that they're not going to want any other drummer." And man, that's a great attitude. So did you do drum lessons when you were young? Did you study drums, or did you just play?
So I look in the early years. I just played up until I was about, I'm going to say 8 or 9 years old. I just my dad had a home studio in various places where we lived. Like, we moved around a lot. So I grew up in an area called the Southern Highlands in Australia, and then we moved to the south of France for 3 years. And it was only really when we moved there, when I turned 8, that Dad's drummer, who was an English guy, Neil Martin, great drummer and also a great educator. He was the first guy that I remember actually teaching me things and teaching me, you know, what's a paradiddle, what's, rudiments, and like, just, getting me practicing, the right things. Up until then, I'd just been putting on headphones,
Sure.
putting on records that I liked, which, at the time were generally like, Pearl Jam or Soundgarden. Those kinds of bands were the ones that I really kind of loved as a kid. And then also, he would play me old like Deep Purple records and Zeppelin and all that sort of stuff. So I played along to a lot of rock tunes growing up. And then Neil started getting me kind of doing rudiments and practicing things. And then once we moved back to Australia from France and I went into a school in Sydney, then I started getting lessons through the school with a teacher, Tony Jex, who was my teacher until I graduated high school. And then even now I still get lessons, so I still reach out to drummers who, not only peers but friends, just to kind of swap ideas and stuff. I ended up going to Berkeley and graduating from there 2010, and had wonderful teachers there as well. So I've always had really good teachers and great inspiration, which hopefully now I can, start to give to others and the younger generation as well, hopefully give a similar level of inspiration that I received,
Well, people are seeing you out there on world stages, and they see you, of course, on social media. So they're going to be asking you stuff if they haven't already. Like, what, have you done any drum clinics or any drum events like that?
I've done a few, like not many, because for the most part I'm just too busy. But I have done a couple. I've really enjoyed the ones that I've put on. But yeah, it's just finding the time to do it. But yeah, I'm definitely open to more of that down the track. And yeah, I'm always talking to, like, I'm always got people reaching out to me on Instagram and Facebook and social media, just asking for advice and just, picking my brains basically. So I've definitely mentored some people over the years as well. And, I love sharing the wisdom, the knowledge that I can. Yeah, so it's definitely something I want to do more of down the track. It's just finding the time, because when you're doing over 200 shows a year, it's hard to find time.
That is absolutely, that's a lot of shows. I thought I did a lot at 100 shows, but man, 200 shows, like that's like old days touring. What Rush used to do, 200 dates a year. Actually, all of the bands would have done.
Yeah. And look, it's what my dad did. When Cold Chisel were coming up, and during his solo years, and he still does a lot of shows for considering how much he has on his plate. So I'm definitely cut from the same cloth.
Yes. Yeah. No. Okay. It's in your blood for sure, right?
Yeah. And look, I absolutely love it. I love performing. I love traveling. I love being in front of a crowd, and you got to love it. You can't do what we do without really loving it, because it's pretty hard on the body, pretty hard. Yeah.
It is. I'm almost 20 years older than you, so it's harder as you get older, for sure. Like the lack of sleep and the time change, but you know what I mean, it's temporary. And honestly, once you get in front of the audience, there's nothing like it. So for sure. So after playing with your dad, how did you shift into playing with other artists?
Well, look, the big thing for me was, once I had toured for a few years with my dad, it got to a point where, I was touring comfortably, playing big shows, but I wanted to definitely go and kind of make my own name, which that was what going to Berkeley was for me. So getting out of Australia, getting out of a music scene where you're very well known, and going to a music scene where you're not known. That was great for me. I loved the relative anonymity that I had in Boston. That was where I kind of was not only branching out to play with other artists, but also proving to myself that I'd earned it. Because it's only natural when you're young, you have that insecurity, especially in this industry. It can be brutal.
Yeah.
So that was a proving ground for me, and a wonderful one at that. I had a great experience there. I graduated. The network of friends and people that I will be lifelong friends with from those years at Berkeley, it's just an incredible experience. So then after that, I came out with a different confidence and a different kind of approach to music, and more worldly as well,
Sure.
more traveled, and more influences as well. And so then it's been one of those things that I've always had people. The phone is always kind of ringing. There's always people reaching out and asking, and a lot of the time I have to say, unfortunately, I'm not available. But in the times when I'm free, it's been great to work with different artists, and I'm very fortunate to work with so many different bands. Yeah.
Yeah. Just looking at your list here, what was kind of the next chronological? So we were playing. You studied at Berkeley. So what happened musically to you or with you afterwards? Who were you playing with?
So after that, I came back into Dad's band. I was still working with him throughout Berkeley. Like, the coolest thing about Berkeley was, teachers would go out on tour for runs and get subs, and occasionally I would miss, weeks at a time of school as well, because I would go back to Australia, or I'd go to Europe and meet Dad for a run there, or there was always stuff happening. So I was still touring that whole time. Out of Berkeley, I came back, worked for a year or two with Dad, and then I actually went back to Boston. I was staying in Boston. My dad was getting classes at Berkeley, and Dad and I were teaching an ensemble at Berkeley.
Wow.
As kind of like a contra deal. It was super cool to see Berkeley from that side of the spectrum. And while I was there, I got a call from a classical pop crossover group from Australia called the 10 Tenors, which is basically 10 classical tenor singers on stage with a band doing, like, Bohemian Rhapsody and all sorts of
That's awesome.
classic tunes. So I toured with them for a year and a half or so. And then I toured with a band called Heaven and Earth out of LA, which was a great kind of, like, very kind of Deep Purple kind of vibe. Guitar player from that. Joe Redder, fantastic singer. Lynn Sorensen was a bass player who played with Paul Rodgers, and then a great keyboard player, Ty Bailey, who's he's incredible, and he's the guy I stay with whenever I'm in Nashville. I just go and crash his pad.
Sure.
Shout out to Ty. Love you, buddy. He's looked after me so well over the years and been my kind of, like, US chaperone every time I'm over there. So all of these bands, I've worked with, but the friendships that come out of them have been the best part. During that time, I was also recording. Dad had his 30th anniversary of being a solo performer at the time, and we recorded a great record called 3030 Hindsight. And so that's where I got to work with Jonathan Cain, Neil Schon, Keith, Bonamassa. That's really kind of where I started working with those guys in the studio mostly. And Jonathan Cain and Neil Schon worked with my dad on records in the 80s when Tony was drumming. So that classic band from, if you check out a record, Freight Train Heart of Dad's, that's Neil Schon, Jonathan Cain, Randy Jackson on bass, and Tony on drums. So it's a fantastic lineup. So getting to work with them later down the track was super cool. We got to record with little Steve Van Zandt as well.
Oh, wild.
on that same record. So yeah, it's funny because working with these legends of the industry, these are kind of people that I've grown up around, that are friends of Dad's, and they're kind of like, I see them in a different way to others, and
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're friends. You've known them.
we're just getting in the studio and making music. It's great fun, and obviously a lot of those records, and still to this day working with Kevin Shirley, amazing producer,
Caveman.
caveman. So yeah, dad's record that's coming out in June, Defiant, that's Kevin produced that. And so yeah, again, I'm just super fortunate to work with the people that I work with. I'm very, very grateful. So after that, then what happened next? Oh, then I recorded the Dead Daisies record,
Mm-hmm.
and that came about. I'm trying to remember how that came about. I think Brian Tishy, who has been
Yes.
in that band over the
Yep.
years, at the time he had some other stuff, some clashes, and they were recording a record in Sydney, and I just got a call from David Lowy, asking if I wanted to come in and cut a record with them. Went in, did that, and again, it's a fantastic record. I really enjoyed the process and working with those guys. And I'm still friends with all of those guys to this day, and that lineup of that band has changed over the years, and it's kind of there's different artists go in and out of that group, and yeah, it's a fantastic band. All the while, the constant, I've always been working with Dad and Lockie. I joined Lockie's band just over 10 years ago now. So probably, I'm going to say 2014, I think it was my first show with him. And that came in because his drummer at the time, I think he had like broken his arm or something. And, Lockie and I had worked together with my dad's band, because Lockie and his brother Clayton are both phenomenal keyboard players and have both been in and around my dad's band for many years now. So, I've known Lockie over 20 years,
Wow.
probably closer to 25 years now, maybe even more. It's crazy. And then he just gave me a call and said, "Oh, do you want to do a little run of shows, just a little regional run in Australia?" And once we started doing that, we kind of quickly realized, we're like, this is the thing. There's an energy between Lockie and I. We have a brotherhood where we're like brothers, and it just evolved. Once we kind of started making music together in such a great way, and then Joel joined, our bass player, and really it just evolved into this thing. And it's like we're all extremely close friends. We love each other dearly and love the music. And it's hard work at times, because it's independent touring, self-funded. Everything's out of Lockie's pocket, and with no major label support. And only recently we've had a big agency come in and start to work with us. So it's been hard work over the years, but it's starting to pay off now. Our biggest fan base, if you look online, is in the States. And for years we were trying to get there, but the visas were too expensive, and it was just too hard to get there. So finally we did it. We did a crowdfunded tour last year in the summer.
Okay.
Where we pre-sold shows. We hadn't even booked the venues yet, and we pre-sold tickets to shows. We knew one was going to be in New York, one was going to be in Nashville, one in LA.
Wow.
And then we finally found the venues. They were all pretty much sold out. A couple of them were sold out, and then we ended up getting approached by a few festivals around that and some other venues, and we're able to build a tour, which it was hard work, but it then opened the door for signing with Reliant Agency, and they put together the last run we've just done, and the two more runs that we've got coming up. So it's just everything's always building up. It's an upward trajectory, and it's hard work, but it's been very it's been a great journey. So that band has been a constant. My dad's band has been a constant, and then I've had these other projects around it. So yeah, Rose Tattoo as well. Honor to work with them. And again, the singer Angry Anderson has known my dad for over 50 years, I'd say. And one of those bands that I grew up loving and listening to, playing along to. I played along to their records as a little kid. Um, and then, funny enough, I always thought if I was to play with Rose Tattoo, because a couple of the crew and people around that band said, "Oh, we've suggested you for the band."
Wow.
And nothing came from it at the time. I was on tour with Dad, and it wasn't until the singer Angry saw me play with Lockie, and then he came up to me and said, "I think it's time." And it was because of the way that gig swings, because of the improvisation, and he said it was all about the boogie. In his own words, he said, "I heard you boogie," and that was the sign that we were ready. And so then I got a call with Rose Tattoo, toured with them for a few years, and did a re-record of the first album, which was amazing to be a part of. It was just again, hard work, put in the hard work and get the reward is the way I've always kind of approached it. And did some great tours with them. And then that kind of pretty much led up to COVID, which kind of, again, shifted things again because, obviously being locked down in Australia and being locked down in Australia during COVID, our individual state borders shut. So we became kind of like individual countries within the country. And so being based in Queensland by that stage, I was kind of probably in a part of the country where there was the least amount of COVID. We're talking like there would be like, maybe like 5 to 10 cases a week. And if there was more than 10, we'd start freaking out and go, and so I was able to then join bands based in Queensland that their drummers were stuck over in like Melbourne or Sydney or somewhere else in the country, couldn't travel to Queensland. So I started getting calls from mostly musicians that I knew, but had never had the opportunity to work with, guys like Russell Morris, who's a legend of Australian music, and great country artist Lee Kernaghan, who's like kind of like the guy here in country music. And I started doing a lot of country gigs, because Queensland there's a big dominance of country music up here, and so I started doing like country music festivals in Queensland where I'd be playing with like half of the bands on the bill, because there was actually one festival in, I think it was Mackay in North Queensland, where they left my kit set up on its own riser and had the backline riser for all the other bands. And I think I did something like 20 shows over a weekend. And it was all like, I had artists reach out to me during the festival that saw I was there and said, "Oh, can you just come in?" So I'd like go back to my room at the end of the day and chart a whole new set. And again, I'd rather be making music and working with people than not, So and then what else? I'm trying to think what else.
Incredible.
I may leave out bands, and I apologize to those bands if I have. Then during COVID, I started playing with a super group that formed during COVID called the Fabulous Caprettos, who I still work with, which is basically a kind of revolving door of famous singers from Australia who also play instruments. But the idea with it was that you didn't have just like featured artists coming on for their songs and then going off. They were all playing each other's songs and were in the band. So, so that's been really cool to be a part of. And I've done a bunch of tours with them between myself and a great drummer, Jerry Pantazis, who's another great Australian drummer. That's been great fun. And then I've been working with, just recently, I've just joined a band out of LA called Ash and Moon, who reached out to me a few months ago. And that's Gary Beers from In Excess, the bass player. And Yohai Portals on guitar, Toby Rand, a great Australian singer who's based in the States. So I've just started working with them, and they've just emailed me a track that I've got to record on, hopefully this weekend. Get it back to them, and then when I'm in the States later in the year, we're going to try and do some stuff. And so that's another new project that has come about recently. But it's just one of those things. I always want to be creating and making music, and if I like the people and like the music, then absolutely I'm going to try and find a spot for it in the
Man,
busy
I'm really
schedule.
glad I managed to fit you in.
It's always like it's going to be random. Like all my friends will tell you that, like, I'm the guy that will call and say, I've just come to your town. I don't give them any notice.
Right.
And the friendships that I've kept over the years are the people that can handle that. Because like the reality is that I go AWOL for months at a time because I'm on the road.
Yeah, people with regular day jobs don't understand, the lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When I'm home, I'm home.
Yeah.
And I teach in here and do a little bit of recording, but it's rare that I'm home for more than a week or two at a time, because I really want to go and see places and play.
Sure.
And but wow, that is nuts. Now it sounds like you do an awful lot of recording. You have a home studio, I assume?
I don't actually. I did during COVID. I moved between a few different houses where I during COVID, I went out and did the thing that everyone did and bought a bunch of mics and plugins and all that sort of stuff. I find that process really tedious, and it's kind of one of those things that I love recording and playing, but the whole engineering side of things, I'm still, it's definitely not my forte, and I'm still learning about that. But I've got a couple of really great studios locally that I work out of if I need to lay down stuff quick. And then when I'm down in Sydney, Dad's got a world-class studio where we've recorded albums. It's where little Steven came and recorded with us. And I've got a beautiful USA custom that lives in that. It's the house studio kit. And so look, again, it's one of those things I would love to record more, but it's, when you're touring it around, it's often hard to have a spot to record your drums where you feel like they're going to get your sound. But yeah, so, I do have places around here that I like, studios that I like that can record me. And, if I've got a gap and someone sends me a track, I'll absolutely do it for sure.
That's awesome. Let's chat about some Gretsch drums. Where were you?
Absolutely.
Where did you first hear or see Gretsch drums?
It would have been Charlie Watts.
Wow. Okay. So you were young?
So I was a Rolling Stones fan growing up. Obviously in the family that I grew up in, rock music was a big part of my life. And, I was a big Rolling Stones fan, big Charlie fan. Later down the track, we were able to do a support of the Rolling Stones in Australia at the Adelaide Oval, and I got to see Charlie's kit, got to sit at it, and
wow,
and meet Don, who's a great Gretsch support. And actual fact, Don was the first guy that reached out to me when I signed for Gretsch, which was really lovely of him.
Wow. And how did that signing come about?
It came about. Look, again, another one of the drummers that I watched a lot of videos growing up was Elvin. I was a jazz fan, and I've never considered myself a jazz drummer or a good jazz drummer. Obviously, there are elements and influences there, but I guess it's not my native language. But I've always been a great appreciator of the great jazz greats. Tony Williams and Elvin were two of the guys that I kind of watched a lot of videos of, and obviously seeing Elvin on Gretches and seeing not only, I guess the thing I love about Elvin was his aggression towards the drum set, because coming from Australia and being in the Aussie rock world, you have to attack an instrument a certain way in this style of music, and seeing him play jazz the way that he did, it was brutal. I loved it. But yeah, going back to how I signed with Gretsch, when I came to the end of my relationship with Tama, who I'd been with for many years, and I, still love their drums. I was talking to the Gretsch rep here, and I'd actually, at that point, I'd bought a couple of Gretsch kits that had been in my collection for years, and they were drums that I always recorded and always kind of like I would sneak out on gigs occasionally and go, these feel great to play. And it was one of those things that I'd spoken to the rep a few times. We'd had a few conversations over a couple of years where each time we had the conversation, it got a little closer. And it got to a point during COVID where, in actual fact, I was working for a music shop, a drum shop in the Sunshine Coast where I live called Malulabar Music. And I was doing videos for their kind of social media because that's, kind of,
sure. Yeah.
I was stuck at home, and that was what I did to kind of earn a living and all that during that period of time. And what that kind of did was it allowed me to kind of play other brands and other stuff. And I fell in love with certain sounds at that time. And Broadcaster was,
yes,
we had a couple of broadcasters come to the shop that I reviewed and played on, and I ended up buying one of them as well. And, I had Gretches in my collection from years back as well. And so it was just kind of like, it got to the point where I was like, I want to play what I want to play. And, I want a certain sound. And that was the only thing that got me that sound. Like, I've got a massive collection of drums, and I guess the biggest compliment I can give Gretsch now is I don't want to use any of the other stuff anymore. And so it's definitely something that and anyone who is a lover of Gretsch drums, who plays Gretsch drums, they understand the feeling you get when you hit one of those drums. There's a feedback that comes through your arm, through your body. When you hit that bass drum, the vibration comes through your legs, and you feel the drum when you play them. And you don't get that feedback from any other drum set out there. There's no drum that feels that way. And like I've gotten to know the people at the company, and they're wonderful people. I visited Gretsch in Ridgeland on this last tour a few months ago, and was able to. Actually, a friend of mine lent me one of his snares for the tour, and it was one of Tony Williams' snares, and it was a bit beaten up and stuff. So I took it there, and we kind of restored it to its old glory. And I was using that on the tour. I ended up recording. We went into Ocean Way Studios in Nashville at the end of the tour and recorded with Lockie about I reckon 5 or 6 songs. And that Tony snare is on all of it. So yeah, they said it was one of his ones from the 80s. But it's that classic yellow, 6.5 deep yellow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane. You've actually done something that, good Lord.
That Tony's played, a guy that I grew up watching videos of. So again, one of those guys that I watched and saw on Gretsch drums. And, years later, I've had the fortune of playing on a drum that has his energy in it. And
that mojo.
Yeah. I'm looking at the comments here as well. I see someone says Taylor Hawkins got me interested in Gretsch. Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the comments. Hello to Adrian as well. Early morning in Puerto Rico. Good morning to you.
Yeah.
Adrian. Wow.
And other Gretsch guys, obviously Stanton over the years has been a wonderful influence on my drumming, especially in the funk stuff that I play. I can remember buying his books, his first books when I was a student, and seeing him do a clinic when I was at Berkeley. So I've always been a huge fan of his sound.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many great players that play Gretsch, and I love the fact that I'm a part of that roster now. That it's an honor to be welcomed into that family. Yeah,
that's crazy.
I love seeing Steve Jordan playing on Gretches with the Stones as well.
Now, isn't that awesome?
That excites me because I'm a Pisces artist as well, and I play some of Steve's hats, the 17s, and huge fan of his drumming. So hearing him on Gretches, it just sounds so good.
It does. It does sound great. What are some of the kits that you have? You have a lot of Gretsch drums. Let's give a rundown of at least some of them. So you've got USA's and you've got a broadcaster kit as well.
I've got all of the American kits. So I've got US, I've got broadcaster, I've got Brooklyn's, and they're all in a similar realm, but they've got subtle differences. I find the broadcasters for Lockie, that is kind of like a match made in heaven. There's something about those, no inner cut on the edge and the outer round that they have on them. Those edges just sound phenomenal. The thin shells, I love those drums. They're so warm and they're so just like nice to play. And in that kind of bluesy funk realm, they're just perfect. With Dad, my main touring kit is a USA Custom, which is just that classic big full Gretsch sound.
What are your
sizes? So I'm a 24 by 14 bass drum. I've gone back to kind of shallow depths now on my drums, just because they get a lower fundamental and just more punch. So 24 by 14. My main kit, it's a 13, 16, 18. So one up. I've always been a one up, two down kind of guy. Occasionally I've run a little kind of like a 10-inch, but to the right of the 13.
Yes, I've seen that, yeah.
And mostly I don't use it often. It's more just if I'm running down something or if I want to do like an accent on it. It's kind of, and that's why people ask me, why is your 10 to the right of the 13? And it's because that 13, all those big kind of like I call them Ian Pace fills, those the big rock fills that I play, that's the main tom I want to go to. So if the 10 was there, I'd go to that. Naturally, ergonomically, that's where I'd want to go, and it just wouldn't be the right sound. So whereas, going down the toms in a right, left sticking, I can go down the 10, 13 to the 16.
Cool.
Pretty easily and ergonomically. The next tour, I'm taking the 10 off and I'm actually putting it over to my left. So I generally run a cluster of toms to my left, above a 12-inch snare. So I've run an auxiliary snare with Dad for years with like a real high crack. And I found when I was over playing on that side snare, when it came to doing fills, coming back across to the main kit, just kind of, it was a waste of energy. So I ended up putting a couple of toms above that 12 just to kind of be able to stay over in that zone. So I've got a 10 and a 12 on that side of the kit above the 12-inch snare. The main snare I'm running on that gig is the 14 by 6.5 bell brass.
Gretsch, great drum.
Phenomenal. It's loud. It's aggressive. It suits me perfectly. And then the 12, I'm either running a Brooklyn 12 chrome over steel.
Cool.
And I'm actually waiting for the Ash Zone. I'm waiting for one to be shipped out to Australia for me. So
that's awesome.
And then with Lockie, I use a broadcaster 22 by 14, 13, 16.
Wow.
With a Swamp Dog as my side snare.
Yeah.
So I do the opposite. With Lockie, I run a side snare, but it's a really low. I call it the douche. It's just it's not something I invented. It's just something I started doing and love, and having a low side snare. I've got a couple of prototypes from that have been made for me over the years that are on floor tom legs as well, to save like around an extra stand. So. It might be something I might hit up Gretsch and see if they'll make me one with some floor tom legs.
I'm sure they would. They're very common.
And then I've got I tend to, if I tour in a region for like often, I always want to leave drums there. I don't like especially if we're going out with the van with gear, I won't get a backline kit. I'm just going to stash a kit there. So I've got a kit that lives in Amsterdam at a backline company that is my touring kit for whenever I'm over there. And that's a Silver Sparkle Brooklyn.
Oh man.
Yeah, and so 22, 13, 16. I've got a 14x5 phosphor bronze that lives there with that kit.
One of those.
Oh,
Wow.
it's so good. They're lovely. And again, with Lockie, I tend to use 5 deep snares just to get a bit more of that kind of. It's just that little bit more of that old school bite, and that kind of like it just suits the style of music more.
Mm-hmm. Do you rim shot your snare drums, Jackie?
Yeah, all the time at different volumes. Even when I'm at low volume, it's always got that kind of, because I've always found that give, obviously it's something that has become my sound. It's the way that I hit a drum. It's the way I get sound that people go, oh, that's Jackie. Yeah, so even when I'm playing quiet, it's still a rim shot because I still like to get the kind of like, I like to hear, the tops. I like to hear the hoops. I like to hear, all of the kind of overtones and everything.
I went the opposite. I stopped rim shotting once I started playing in the Appa band because it's more that dead sound. And my friend came out to see us play, and he goes, "You need to rim shot that bell brass snare drum." I'm like, "It's going to be." He goes, "Trust me, it's not too loud." So I'm going to do a Jackie Barnes, and I'm going to rim shot.
The only drum that I don't rim shot is the fat snare on my left.
Okay,
because it's tuned low, and you don't. It's not that part of that sound. So it's just the way I play the drums. That's the way I've always done it, and I grew up in bands where that was the sound. That was.
And you needed to. I mean, you're playing rock, and it's loud music. You need to honestly, because otherwise you're just going to get obliterated.
Absolutely. I tried, and then I've got a broadcaster that lives in the US, and I've got some Brooklyns that live here. I've got a US custom. I've got probably about maybe 10 Gretsch kits now.
Love it.
Yeah, and then my drum tech Brian was. He came up to. We were prepping some stuff for all the tours we've got coming up, and he was like, "Oh, I just saw someone offered me an 80s stop sign kit." And I was like, "Oh, don't do this to me."
Yes,
because he runs a little drum shop in Brisbane, and quite often gets vintage kits coming through, trade-ins and stuff. And he's like, "There's a guy who's trade-ins," So he came to me the other day and said, "Oh, there's a vintage Gretsch out there that someone wants to trade in." I'm like, "Oh, get me some photos."
Right. And what color is that kit?
I don't even know. As soon as he said 80s stop sign, I was like, "Get me some photos." It would probably be that kind of like that kind of natural wood, that kind of mahogany looking.
Right. Yes, I've got something similar.
You got something there? What have you got in the studio?
This is a USA custom from 08. It's actually 12, 14, 22, and the matching 5.5 snare. And in the cases is the broadcaster white glass glitter 10, 12, 16, 20 by 16. And the bell brass. I do have the matching Ridgeland snare drum that my wife bought me for our anniversary. And this is a little Catalina club kit with a 16-inch drum.
Cool.
So, and various other Gretsch snare drums here. So there's lots here, but certainly not Jackie Barnes drums, which is great. And that's a great idea to leave drum kits different parts of the world that you're going to be playing.
That I'm playing often. I've done probably 5 or 6 tours of Europe on my drums there.
Yeah.
In the last year, since I picked up my broadcaster that lives in Nashville, I've done 3 runs on it. And I'm about to take it out again. It's going to be going out with me for a few months. So, it's like I'd much rather, they're dialed into me. They've got my heads on them. They're, they're dialed in. The only thing I travel with a snare, a pedal, and my cymbals and just accessories and stuff like that. And I always kind of change what snare I take out with me. It depends on what I'm feeling at the time. The thing is your ears evolve and your taste change as well. And I find that even since signing with Gretsch, I'm using different snares and different, I go between like kind of loving the Brooklyns and loving the, it's like,
Sure. Yeah.
I'm really loving the kind of aggressive nature of the Brooklyns at the moment. And so it's kind of like Brooklyns
are great.
I thought, why not have some of everything so I can pick and choose,
Yeah, no, Brooklyn's are, and you know what? They're super affordable. They are, and they are. My friend lent me his little jelly bean kit of those during COVID, and I could not believe how incredible they sounded, and that the kick drum was off the
Oh,
charts,
they're killer.
unbelievable. And I look at our Gretsch pricing, and like, how can you not?
And then that's the thing. So the reason why I got the one that I left in Amsterdam is because they have such a crazy VAT on gear there. So you get your pricing and then they add that back on in tax pretty much.
Right.
And so I looked at the pricing and go, well, I'd love to get a broadcaster for there, but I looked at it and I said I can't deny that pricing on the Brooklyn and then I was like, it gives me a chance to get to know that shell in that kit in that band, and then I've used it for a couple of tours with Lockie over there, and it's phenomenal. And I love the Silver Sparkle. They said we have a Silver Sparkle in stock. I'm like, say no more.
I love Silver Sparkle. I love sparkle drums. I love wood drums. I like it all.
I love them all. If they're kind of like like the actually one of the first Gretsch kits I ended up picking up during COVID was the 135th anniversary there, emerald green.
Come on.
Over the ribbon mahogany.
Oh,
So I've got one of those. I just sent that out with my tech last night. I'm going to use that on a show next week. So that's going out. We've got a one-off date in between some Roachford dates next weekend with my dad. We're doing a festival in the Gold Coast, Blues on Broadbeach, phenomenal festival, and we're doing it as a soul show. So I thought that's the perfect kit for that show. So I don't do many shows on it. It mostly stays it actually lives in my bar. I've got a whiskey bar in my house, and that 135th anniversary kit just lives next to the bar in dark lighting.
That's awesome.
Surrounded by good scotch.
That is amazing. What do you? Obviously, you're using backline when you come to and play in Orangeville. Should backline drum? No.
Yes. Yeah, I'll most likely be trying to spec something. I'm not sure. Sometimes I find, I would say half of the time they give me a Gretsch, half the time they go, you just get what's on the. I think it helps if you're a headliner. I think we've got a headline slot, so I might have a bit more pull on that one. I do have a friend who has a broadcaster, reasonably local. He's in Montreal, but maybe I can convince him to take a little road trip.
Yeah, hit me up if you because I've
you got a gig that night. That's a shame, but
yes, I know. Tell me, right? It figures.
But I'm going to be back. We've done a bunch of gigs around the Ontario area especially over the last 5-6 years. Like my first show in Canada with the Lockie Dolly Group was Kitchener Blues Festival.
Okay. Yep.
And we got taken off stage after 2 songs because a tornado hit. So we were on the main stage. It was like packed. We were loving it. And we saw the lady like with a microphone tapping it, getting ready to walk on stage. We're like, what's going on? We've just started. And it was blue skies in front of the stage.
Right.
And she goes, oh, sorry, we're going to have to evacuate everyone into the town hall because there's a tornado. And we're like, it's blue skies. She said, look behind the stage. We turned around and it was just like apocalypse.
You never know. Right.
But we have done Kitchener since, we've done Mont Tremblant, we've done a lot of those festivals around Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick. Yeah, love it.
Awesome. I am about 7 minutes from Casino Rama. So you may have, if you ever play there, please let me know. They've got killer backline at Casino Rama, 6 or 7 drum kits and tons of gear as well. But if you're looking and needing some Gretsch drums, I can definitely let you use something for the night. And if I'm not playing, I'll come and tech.
Come on, let's do it, man. And then again, obviously, and this is one of the greatest things with I've found with the Gretsch artists I know around the world is that, they're all up for a hang and they'll help out. And I've had friends that have come to Australia that have used my drums, and it's just like, yeah, absolutely.
You could start a backline.
I've had friends that have, that tour we did last year with Lockie, when we did the crowdfunded shows, we did a show at Williamsburg Music Hall, and I was struggling to find gear. And then I ended up, I was talking to an old Berkeley buddy of mine. He's like, I've got a anniversary Sparkle broadcaster that I just got. He said, if you're happy to use 20, 12, 14, I'm like, absolutely. And so he brought that along to the gig. Pretty much ended up teching for the gig, and it was like, yeah, great. It's just like really supportive. It's like, and it just makes a difference when you can get the right drums and you can get a Gretsch on the gig. It just makes life so much better.
Man.
Because I did some shows on that tour where it's like you get the spec of the rundown, and there was 2 shows where the venues or festivals had kind of said, oh, they just said DW kit, and I'm like, okay, well, at least it'll be decent sounding, whatever. And I get there and it's a PDP kit, and I'm like, oh, and like hardware that's falling apart. And look, that's part and parcel with touring. You get that. Unfortunately, most of the bands that I work with, that I'm able to, put my foot down and kind of not demand, but just at least, be a little more forceful with it and get what I want, So.
They're becoming, especially when we play in the States, certainly a whole lot more Gretsch. I had a USA custom kit a couple of weeks ago in Kansas, and it was ridiculous. And they had a bell brass snare drum, or the matching like they had on a back line, because they said Neil is a Gretsch artist, and so like I came in, and they had a beautiful set of Sabian cymbals. Nobody knows it yet. I have just signed with Sabian last week. It's the first time.
Is that the cat out of the bag there?
Yeah, totally. And ordered some new cymbals. So excited, but it's great to
congrats.
get what you like to play. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what I've ended up doing. It came down to wanting to play the gear that I wanted to play and what inspires you. And it's like, it's different for everyone, but I can truly say at the moment, I'm playing exactly what I want to be playing. It's like,
How great is that, right? Yeah.
And look, that makes you play differently. It makes you approach music differently. And it makes you evolve and it makes you grow at a faster rate. And, so I'm constantly inspired by the gear that I'm playing, which is great. It's,
there's nothing like a good morning to Chip Ritter, who tuned in from the,
Chip.
Chip, Drummers Education.
I know of the name. Yeah.
Yeah. Fabulous guy. Crazy drummer as well. Lovely guy. You had a little visit to the factory a bit ago, I saw.
Yeah.
What's that experience like for you?
That was great. Look, it was one of those things where, with the Lockie Dolly group, I tend to do, most of the logistics because my brain works that way. I'm really? I'm very specific with all that sort of stuff, and I'm good at it. So for that band, I tend to, Lockie, once he confirms all the dates, he'll send it to me, and I'll kind of be on my computer and I book all the flights and the hotels and the, all the travel. And this particular tour, we had a gig in South. What was it? It was in South Carolina somewhere, and the next show after that was Orlando. And I looked at the routing, and Savannah was halfway between, and we had a day off. And so I was like, part of me was like, I wanted to go on one of these tours. I wanted to go to Savannah and then head up to Ridgeland. And this just worked out perfectly. So I kind of like got Lockie on the phone and said, have a look at Savannah. It looks like a great place, really beautiful city. It's halfway between where we've got to be and where we are. Are you happy if I book there? It's not because I wanted to go to the Gretsch factory, but it happens to be half an hour from the Gretsch factory. And he was like, all good. So I ended up booking a comm in Savannah. I took the touring van with my drums. I actually ended up getting some mods done to my broadcaster. I got a director shell put on my rack tom.
Yes, me too.
And the tom block on my bass drum. So I went in and met all the team. It was great to be there. Great to meet all the people that have had their hands on all of my drums.
Right.
Seeing the process, seeing how family orientated it is, which, coming from a very, where a family where, family is everything, seeing that and being an artist or being part of the Gretsch family is like, it's like coming home there. You get treated like you're part of the family.
Right.
Everyone was really welcoming, and I'm not high up on the food chain of Gretsch artists, but like they treated me like I was, like they would anyone, I guess. And it was great I'd met Paul Cooper before that, and Josh. I'd met them at the Nashville Drum Show, and I happened to be in Nashville last year when there was a Gretsch artist hang that I got invited to by Andrew Shreve.
Yep.
And that's where I met Andrew. That's where I met Paul, Josh, and like all those kind of a bunch of artists that live in Nashville. And so then that kind of planted the seed of, well, next time you're in and around Savannah, let us know and we'll hook you up. And actually, I met Dave Anania there as well, who is now the head of artist relations. And so I met all those guys last year and have kept in touch with them. And I emailed them a few months before the tour and said, I've got this day off. Do you mind if I would have been happy to just go to the factory, take a photo in front of that mural, say hello to someone and piss off back to Savannah. But they were like, no. Like I got there and Paul was having a cigarette break or something. And he just put the cigarette. I come in and he's like, we're going to drill some stuff. We're going to I got to,
What a place, right?
What an amazing place. And just being there, having just like seen so many photos of it and videos of artists going there and just being in that, walking through those doors and seeing all those shells and seeing the drums and seeing the raps and just feeling the energy. That was special.
And the smell of the sawdust and the nitrocellulose, that mix.
Oh, yeah. Right? Oh, I still, every time I reskin my drums, I still chuck my head inside the drum and get a sniff of the silver sealer.
Something else, man.
There's something about it. And, it's just,
Did you get to meet Fred and Dinah?
What's that, sorry?
Did you get to meet Fred and Dinah?
I didn't. They weren't there. I would love to. Dinah actually sent me a lovely message on Facebook after I joined the family.
No, you're the best.
And I would love to get the opportunity to meet them down the track. You never know. And, I think I've been talking to Paul next time I go there. We didn't have time this time, but he wants to take me out to his place and check out his collection. And, so that'd be awesome. But, we had a great hang there. And I may or may not have left with an extra snare drum. No, I did. I ended up picking up a Ridgeland because I had done a demo on a Ridgeland, but I didn't have one in my collection, and I was just like, you don't happen to have any stock here of a 5D, just a maple finish, and they had one, and I may have left with it, and
you may have, allegedly.
Allegedly, and I use that on most of the tour.
It's a cool drum, right?
It's a great drum, and I would love a whole kit in those shells.
Neat, right? Because I know Paul wanted to make that for years. Combination of the three woods,
and it makes sense. It does make sense, and yes, and it's a very different.
It is
snare in their lineup, so it's great. Yeah. Do
you have the deep one?
I've got a 5. But I definitely see myself getting a deep one for sure. I might get one matching a finish of one of my kits.
Should.
I generally don't. It's funny. It's one of those things I've never really done matching snares. The kits that I have that I've got matching snares, I generally don't use them. But
right.
I thought about. I got a matching snare made for my Nashville kit, but it's one of the deep ones that'll be on the side. And that I was hoping to pick that up when I went to the factory, but they were too quick and they'd shipped it out already.
Wow. How long does it take to get drums to you in Australia from Ridgeland?
Well, here's the thing. So the turnaround is it depends on what you're getting done. You can
Yep.
get drums pretty quick anywhere if you're going to go with a wrap.
Yes.
Obviously, if you're going to get like a lacquer or a wood finish, you're going to be waiting a long time for that because there's not a lot of people working for the company, and it's a long process. There's a reason why their high gloss finishes look incredible. It's because of how many layers they do, and so most of my kits are wraps. Not only because I love the look of the wraps, but yeah, when I've gotten them, I'm impatient. Like I'm one of those guys that it's a spur of the moment, and I'll want to get it pretty quick. So when I signed with Gretsch, I remember when it actually came to signing the contract and becoming an artist, I was like, well, I'm starting a big arena tour around Australia in 8 weeks time. And the rehearsals are before that. How soon can they get the shells out? And let's put it this way, they went above and beyond and had the shell. I'm not going to say how quickly they had the shells out, but it was bloody quick. And look, they're a different kind of when it comes to shipping stuff out to Australia. Obviously, in Australia, you're dealing with distributors who they'll have to combine various brands on one shipping manifest, and they have to get it all together to be able to make it work for them. But Gretsch Australia, who are Daddario Australia, I have a great relationship with them. They're not only great reps to me, but really good friends. So yeah, Mark Inglaze went above and beyond to get those drums out to me, in just ridiculous time. It was like I couldn't believe when he came back to me and told me how soon he could get them. I was just like, I'm not going to ask how, but thank you.
It doesn't take them long to build the wrapped drums. My white glass glitter kit really quickly too.
And it's the handy thing about having the bank of shells. Just they can grab a shell and kind of cut it to depth. And
how cool is this, right? You've always wanted to do this, and now you get to actually have the drums that you love and play, and as the sound playing all over the world. Man, it doesn't get any better than that.
It's very, very fortunate, and it's a relatively new journey for me, but it's a very familiar one, and it feels like I always tell people it feels like I've kind of found home.
I agree.
In that sense of the sound, it just feels comfortable. It's like, and it makes me want to play more. It makes me happy to play 200 plus shows a year.
For sure. Yeah. I'm sad when I see that I'm going to have another company for a backline for a run, just because it's economically, that's what's going to work for the tour.
100%. Yeah.
But I will hunt for Gretsch drums if people I know across Canada or the States. And sometimes they're like, take this, take my kit for they did that. I've done that for a couple of weeks, taking a kit, and we pay them what we would have paid Long and McQuaid.
And again, if you're in Nashville and you need drums, I've got a kit there. So.
Oh man, thank you. That's possible at some point. That's so cool, man.
And and I'm also excited to try out all the new hardware they're bringing out.
I'm so excited.
I'm excited about that. It looks great.
That's pretty soon. I had Dave Onania on here a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying it's really kind of anytime it actually looks like it's good and functional.
Yeah, well, I have a set of the G5 hardware that I tour with Lockie with my Nashville kit, and I love it. It's great. And so if they've made improvements on that, which they definitely can make improvements on, it's going to be even better. So
that's great.
That's exciting because it's one of those things. It's like I love and I use Yamaha hardware and love their hardware. And I love the Tama hardware as well, but it's like it's always hard to pick up hardware when and find the hardware that you like, So if they can start making some really top level hardware, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be great.
It'll be a game changer for a lot of us. What I would definitely buy a whole set of that, and
the bags as well look cool, and the fact that they've the acquisition by Gawa, and they make great cases, and they're a great company as well. So I'm excited about the future of where it's going to go.
We have a comment here from Mick. I'm not sure to say the last name. Rajan, great drummer is Jack. Watched him grow up and develop into an awesome drummer. Coffee next time you're in Adelaide, mate.
I do love coffee, and I will be in Adelaide.
Me too.
Adelaide next week or the week after. Yeah, next week actually. Yeah.
How far is that from you?
It's about a 2.5 hour flight.
Oh, so it's far.
And it's in a weird time zone in Australia where it's a 30-minute time difference.
Well, we have another one.
We've got like half time zones.
We have one in Newfoundland. Is half an hour later.
Yeah, so because Australia is like landmass. In terms of landmass, it's almost as big as North America.
Wow.
But our it's almost the same size as the US and Canada combined, and we've got 26 million people here. It's like,
wow,
because we all live around the coast. We like the ocean, so
I don't blame.
But so there's a lot of travel distance between places. It's generally, for the most part, you don't do tour bus tours here. It's all fly dates. And the bigger bands will do fly dates, and they'll have trucks going around with their gear, like big trucks. But yeah, for the most part, any bands that come here, it's fly dates, because there's just such big distance between, and it's impossible to make that distance overnight. It's like,
right.
So for example, I've got a lot of times when you do Perth, which is on the west coast of Australia, you do Adelaide, which is kind of the south coast, but in the middle. You would generally do those two lumped together in a weekend. And I think that's something like a 30-hour drive.
Oh my.
So it's like, no one does that. So it's like, most of the time, most tours I do, when it comes to trucking our gear around, it'll truck the whole East Coast across to Adelaide, but we'll use backline in Perth, because it's just impossible for our gear to get over there unless there's like a week for the truck to make the journey and the drivers to get the appropriate rest and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I know of one or two bands that own a tour bus in Australia, and they might take it out for just East Coast runs. They won't do like big tours on it. It'll be like Weekend Warrior kind of stuff. It's just not a thing here. So Europe and US are the only times I get to experience tour buses, depending on the band.
Yeah, those are fun to sleep on, for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually sleep. I don't sleep well at the best of times, but tour buses I tend to sleep really well in those little tiny cocoons, and that motion on the road tends to kind of I usually sleep pretty well on those things.
I love that. Just don't take the upper bunk unless you're wearing Velcro pajamas, right?
It's also hard for I'm 6'2" and like like 115 kilograms. I don't know what that is in pounds, but it's I don't want to break the bunk and fall on the guy underneath. And
that would.
And also the climbing up, especially when you do the ones that have three rows of bunks, and you have to
at night, or you have to get out and
when you've just finished a show and you're tired and you have to be a bloody gymnast to get up there. It's like, I like the middle one because you just crawl in.
That's perfect. Yeah. Oh, man, that is awesome. Any advice for young and upcoming drummers who say, man, I want to play drums for a living. I want to tour the world. I want to do what you do. What is your advice for them, Jackie?
I get this question a lot, because I get a lot of young drummers kind of asking me the same thing. And one of the main things I always tell them is be relentless. It's one of the things my dad always taught me. Be relentless. Be prepared. Be over prepared, be professional, be a good hang. It's just be relentless in everything. Never come across as lazy. Again, when I prepare for a show, I want to get to the first rehearsal so prepared that they're kind of taken aback and go, oh, well,
Wow, great.
The other advice, if you have any kind of voice, sing, and learn how to sing backing vocals. A singing drummer will always be, much more valuable than a drummer who doesn't sing. So, again, I've had bands that have asked me to do a tour, and I've come in having learnt all of their background vocal parts, not just one part, but all the parts. So if they go, oh, can you jump on? There's this part missing. I'll already know the part.
That's great.
So be prepared in that regard. So I tell young kids when they're practicing to, and this is one of the things that one of my favorite teachers from Berkeley, Dave DeCenzo, he was always teaching me about vocalizing while drumming. You see it on a lot of his videos. He's vocalizing, whether it be counting, talking, whatever, while he's playing. That just kind of trains the brain in a different way to handle rhythms and the separation of the rhythm that you're speaking or singing versus what you're playing. And for the most part, I don't have to think about the rhythms and stuff. Right. It's more, I'm just thinking about the notes and the parts. So it's just one of those things like, away from drumming, just if anyone out there is trying to develop the ability to sing background vocals, again, this is something my dad taught me. And even though he's a lead singer, this was one of the best bits of advice he ever gave me was, if you're driving, in the shower, whatever, you're listening to a song you like and you're singing along, don't sing the melody. Find harmonies. Whenever the chorus comes about or during the verse where there's BVs, don't sing the melody, but work on finding harmonies around above or below the melody. So it's just one of those things. Every time something comes on the radio, I'll always jump on a harmony. And that's given me the ability to, do it pretty seamlessly and not have to think about it as much. And so even if you don't have the best voice in the world and you can't sing great, you can still develop the skills enough to a point where you can do parts and you can fit into a section, and again, I've had friends of mine who are lead singers that have always struggled with harmonizing, and again, those kinds of exercises have helped them. And so be a singing drummer, be relentless, and don't be a dick. The hang is really important, and there are definitely a lot of divas out there, and a lot of people that just don't let your ego take over. The less ego, the better. And look, I find that some of the most famous and best musicians that I've met, worked with, known, some of them have the least amount of ego.
Right.
Or the right kind of ego. It comes out when it needs to, and it's part of the performance versus, just the way you are. So just be friendly, be approachable, be professional. And also, just, be willing to stand up for yourself as well and not be walked over. It all comes around.
Been amazing. Sounds like you learned an awful lot.
And play Gretsch drums.
That's the number one.
Yeah. Number one, play the right, again, find your sound and, find instruments that inspire you and play with people that inspire you. So, and I'm fortunate to be able to do that.
Amazing. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the stories. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out, because I remember we spoke about doing this around probably when I signed for Gretsch, and then
around there,
and then I've been playing nonstop since, and we finally squeezed in a time, which is great. I love doing this sort of thing, and I love chatting with people and connecting with others, and I definitely want to do more of this moving forward.
and you totally should. And please let me know when you are here. Of course, I'll see it on socials anyways. But sometimes, as you said, you don't necessarily know until it's right upon you,
Yeah. And this Canada one, it kind of came about randomly, this Orangeville gig. And Lockie told me about it during the last US run. He goes, "Do you reckon I should do this?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, let's do it."
Wow. It'll be a fun gig. I lived there as a little kid when it was a little town and kind of outside of Toronto by about an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, like that. And it's lovely, and it'll be a fun show.
And Toronto's great, and it's kind of going into summer, and it's going to be a vibe.
It's going to be,
How's the weather up there at the moment?
It's probably going to be about 15, 16 today, 17 maybe. So not terrifically warm, but it's sunny, and it's going to be a beautiful weekend.
Cold though. I remember winters in Boston. That was brutal.
Yes, this past winter was terrible here too. So than we have in decades, and we had an ice storm, and it was not a fun winter. But I was out on a tour run, so I missed most of the ice storm. But ugly. But you're going to be coming into some good weather here. So
yeah, and your team's still in the NHL playoffs, are they?
Yes, unfortunately, we lost last night in overtime, but we're hopeful. I was watching it just before bed. I'm like, oh man, please. It's exciting for us, hopefully. Yeah. So you never know, but we just don't get too excited. They haven't won the cup since I was born. So
I know they always get to that first round of playoffs, and
if they do,
if they do, it's like
so instantly, or the second. Yeah. But you never know.
You never know.
They're looking good. We planned the parade already. So.
You may as well.
Thanks, Jackie. All the best to you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And
thanks for tuning in.
Next time. Take care, everyone.
All right. All the best.